How do we tackle and use the principles of the inner game, vision, focus, beliefs, standards to enhance your sales performance on a day-to-day basis so that the concepts of mindset are not just nebulous and out there in the ether, but they're actually things we can take down to our level and apply them right now to get more sales and to achieve goals throughout the summer. And in a couple weeks, we're going to be starting this call called a Dream Team Call on Mondays, where the top reps in the company will discuss what's actually working so that over the course of the summer, you can learn what the best reps are doing in real time. And those reps who are on this call consistently, there's going to be some major prizes for you. So you want to have a winning streak of being on this call and being the top reps in the company over the course of the summer. If you do that, you're not going to regret it, I promise you. So enjoy this interview, guys. Jessica Colvin came down from Logan, Utah to interview me in preparation for her rookie summer, but she asked questions that drew out principles of the inner game that if you apply them right now, they will help you sell more on a day-to-day basis and help you become the best version of yourself over the course of the summer, extending far beyond the summer so that you can show up as your best self in all other aspects of your life. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on the other side.
Take one.
All right, Jess. My day-to-day schedule, my rookie year, I thought that I was probably not going to be the most talented. I just judged my social skills based off of my friends that were selling, that were doing very well. And they were clearly more adept at social interaction naturally. They were more witty naturally. And so I thought, okay, I could pride myself on something I can really control, which is my work ethic. So I measured that on how much time I was working. And I also measured that on consistency with being on the doors longer. So our schedule then was we started work at 9 a.m. We had our first morning meeting from 9 to about 9:30, 9:45. And then we would get out on the doors, depending on how long area was from the office, we would get out around 10:15, 10:30. Usually ride in the car with my team leader or somebody else and have them drop me off first. That was my way of getting ahead. Knocking by usually 10:30, and then we would take lunch from 2 to 4 p.m. It was like a siesta basically. And some days I'd take a nap, some days I would study the manual, depending on how tired I was. Then we tried to get back on the doors by 4, but that meant the last person in the car was on the doors by 4 p.m. And then I would knock without taking any other breaks. I wouldn't sit on the curb. I would never call anyone to talk during the day. Even when I was really struggling, I never called my parents or anyone else to have them talk me through it or something. Knocking till at least dark, and dark was, depending on the time of year or the month, dark usually was around 8:30 to 9 p.m. And then I tried to hit about 5 doors after dark. So that was my rookie schedule, and that meant that I ended up being on the doors for how long? Knocking for a total of about 8.5 hours, if I didn't get that math wrong, which would be embarrassing. So 8.5 hours to 9 hours knocking total per day, and never resting during that time. So being the hardest working meant knock more hours, knock more doors during those hours. So I had this all built in my head, like the rate at which everyone was working, I needed to work harder and try to work faster, like a numbers game. I wanted to really just show that I could have higher statistics and probability of selling people. So that meant that I needed to really look at my numbers and track them every day. When we got back to the office, which was usually around 9:30 or 10, I would stay at the office until I was the last person in the office. So Tim Hedrick, the owner of the company, was there. And usually my regional, Chase Katowski, was there as well. But I would be training, watching videos in the bathroom, like doing role plays in the mirror, weird stuff, and I wouldn't leave until Tim was done. So that was usually about midnight. So then I would come home, and I'd get home around like 12:15, 12:30, do my normal kind of spiritual routine, which is reading, praying, and then reviewing the day, seeing what I could have done better. I wasn't getting to bed until 1:30 almost every day. Up early in the morning, usually like 6:30, get a quick 45-minute workout in, shower at the gym, and I was usually at the office around 7:30 a.m. I don't even know what time frames those are. So whatever I had to do to be at the office before 8 was 8 a.m. role playing, or schedule trainings with team leaders, like my own team leader, my regional, other team leaders that were willing to train me. And yeah, that was basically my schedule. So I was not sleeping very much. What would I do to really reset and try to rest so that I was like every week at least had some energy? In terms of my hierarchy for replenishing myself, it was like replenish my spirit, then replenish myself physically, replenish myself emotionally. But never miss church stuff or like my spiritual practices, because I thought if I miss that stuff to replenish physically, then I'm actually cheating myself holistically altogether. So I took that really seriously. And even when I got married to my wife, like 3 summers in, we always asked for, in our church, we have church volunteer opportunities where we have callings, and we always asked for a calling when we were in the markets that we sold in. The church kind of leadership would say, hey, don't do this because we know you're only here to work for the summer and then you're providing for yourself the rest of the year. And we were like, no, we need to do this because, again, hierarchy is replenished spiritually. So we always asked for those types of things because we wanted to give back and contribute. I didn't want to trick my mind into thinking that success meant putting aside things that I say I value the most. And I know that this isn't for people necessarily that are members of my church, but I'm just trying to point out like the order of priorities. And that really actually helped, to your question about what helps rejuvenate. That really helped rejuvenate because then when I would get home from church or whatever, I'd basically sleep for 4 hours on Sunday. And we would try to have people over Sunday nights and play games and stuff to just have a good time and like have some fun. On the weekends, again, I'm shy and I'm an introvert, and I was also just so physically tired that oftentimes I'd fall asleep and I would sleep through the activities. Now I'm just being honest on what my actual schedule was my rookie year. So yeah, does that answer your question about like rejuvenating?
That was perfect.
Do you want to know my ideal rookie schedule if I could redo that again, actually? Let me tell you a couple problems with that schedule. One, I wasn't resting enough. So I was being inefficient with my time and training because of my goal to be the hardest worker in the room. I took this from The Rock. He talks about be the hardest working person in the room or something. I would actually build my belief systems better before the summer so that I had already convinced myself that I could be as charismatic and as good of a sales rep as everyone else. Because I had basically built this belief system that like I have to be the hardest working person because I'm not as talented as everyone. However, there's a flawed nuance in that thinking, which is I already had a baseline assumption that I couldn't be as talented as them even through the hard work. So I put my stock in the work itself, which you should do, but at the detriment of a belief system. Now, what I would do differently is build up my belief systems before I got into the summer and say, I'm going to be the hardest working person in the room so that I can be the hardest or the best sales rep in the company. And I would just have taken that frame of reference going into it. My goal this summer is to outsell everyone, but I will also outwork everyone in order to do that. I'd build up my belief systems. I'd build up my tolerance for emotional resilience, or I'd build up my tolerance for emotional pain to be much higher. That was also my problem with, I wasn't sleeping enough because of my desire to be the hardest working person, and because my definition of hard work meant more hours than everyone. That caused me to be emotionally unstable in a way that made the on the doors experience much harder than it needed to be. So I would have prioritized sleeping more and also prioritized quality training that led to an increase in outcomes on the doors, so an increase in actual sales, and then prioritize being the hardest working person on every single doorstep. So I'd have rules for myself about never resting, not taking breaks, but then say adjust that hard work mindset towards hardest working person in effort that you give on every single interaction, as well as knocking more doors than everybody else until I had gained up a skill set that meant that I could sell everyone. Because in the attempt to work harder, I was also trying to knock more doors. However, had I just focused on working the hardest I could work on every single doorstep, what that would have done is made it so I was knocking much less doors, but that I was selling every person that I talked to, essentially. Every qualified person, obviously. So that would be the mindset adjustment that I would make if I were to redo my rookie summer. Just going into it with a belief system of, no, I'm gonna be the best at this job. What that means is I'm gonna outwork everybody and I'm gonna work harder on every single door to get sales. And then I'm going to have strategic training that actually builds my skill sets so that I can out-skills, so that I can out-train and outperform. I also would have taken more time to be creative because I'm a fairly creative person, so I really get fueled by creativity. I don't get fueled as much by taking a nap as I do by making something, drawing, writing, that sort of thing. So I would have prioritized more time with journaling and reflection, actually. But again, my mindset would have been, I'm going to win, not just win in the hard work department. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So do I feel that I've achieved higher mental resilience and capacity to endure pain? Yeah, 1,000%. Because I was so upset at myself for how I responded to adversity my first summer. Now, granted, I never stopped, but I would say, yeah, for sure, I have that capacity now, greater than I did, and I'm working on it in many other ways as well. Tactically speaking, how did I do that? How did I build up emotional resilience and tolerance to pain emotionally? I actually used physical things to build up my tolerance to emotional pain. So I would simulate these emotionally trying experiences in the gym and then with my interactions with people. I hate talking to people if I'm having a hard day because I'm an introvert and I want to go like rejuvenate, replenish on my own. So instead of doing that, I would choose to go talk to people and say, okay, be so on point that nobody knows I'm having a bad day. And I prove that to myself by engaging in interactions with people. So I'd force myself into those social engagements and try to make somebody's day too. Because if you can pull off making somebody's day, then you've proved to yourself that you have emotional resilience if something hard's happening. And I would take that mindset of like, all right, serve people and I build emotional resilience doing that. I want to circle back to this idea of simulating, because that was the biggest thing. Simulatory experiences helped me build emotional resilience in a way that nothing else did. Richard Dawkins has a famous concept that he's outlined in some of his books on the science of evolution. He basically has this theory that human consciousness was developed by our ability to simulate, and that's why we have become the apex predator on Earth, is because apex predator that we know of, Leo. That's why we become the highest known apex predator on Earth in this dimension. It's a very weird inside joke. So Richard Dawkins' theory is that we developed the capacity to become this apex predator because of our ability to simulate. And he says other species only learn through trial and error. That's how they've survived. We survived through simulation. And he says the reason why species that can simulate have a far greater advantage over species that can't is because the other species have to learn through trial and error. And he says, trial is costly and error is deadly. So naked mole rats are among the most resilient species, or among the most resilient animals on planet Earth. And the reason why is not because they're the strongest, but because they're the most adaptable. This is important because they've been able to make pivots in order to survive over time. Now, that is still something that's not as impressive as being able to simulate an experience. Think about it, a pilot simulates everything perfectly before they ever fly their plane the first time. Now, why would that be important? It's because it's such high stakes to fly a plane that if you don't simulate, you run into the trial and error situation, where if you can make it through the error phase and not die, because like an error while flying, if you don't know how to fly, kills you, right? The trials that you come upon that you don't know how to handle, if you survive them, that's costly. So that costs time, effort, energy, and money, which energy is money. Now, when you can simulate, you eliminate trial and error completely, because trial and error can happen in a vacuum and it doesn't kill you, it's not costly. So I used to simulate, this is all very long-winded, but it's like important, I think, to understand the concept. Knowing that, I thought, let me see if I can simulate these emotionally challenging experiences with things physically. I would put like maybe 400 pounds or something on 500 pounds, and I would strip the weights off until I got to the last plate. And then I would go for as many reps as I possibly could. And when it got hard, then I would imagine that I was on the doors and someone rejected me in a harsh way, because I would take that so personally my first summer. And I would imagine how I would respond to that as I'm doing like leg press. So you put yourself in an environment where your mind is doing the same thing that you would experience in the emotionally challenging environment of sales. Now what that did, I did this just as a kind of, not a joke, but as, I don't know if this is gonna work, but at least I like working out and I'll get in good shape doing it. And I would do this almost every workout with one lift. Whatever the hardest lift was for me that day, I would choose to simulate. And it built up this emotional resilience in a way that if you ask my wife like what Hayden's pain tolerance is, she'll tell you it's a problem in our house that Hayden doesn't understand pain, because I've tricked myself into not thinking about pain the same way. So it's actually led to like health challenges, because like I won't go get help until it's like really painful. Yeah, that's like a framework for building the emotional resilience, is simulating with physical things or things that you just don't like. So if your problem is that you're not emotionally resilient because you don't like rejection, then simulate rejection in a way that causes the same thing to happen in your mind, but with a physical experience. Yeah, any other clarification or questions on that?
That was great.
Okay, sorry, long-winded, but like it gives you a psychological framework for it.
I like the explanation too. I like the details.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, what do you do in the off season to prepare for the summer?
I can tell you what I did my rookie summer to prepare, and then what I would do if I were to do that all over again. So my rookie summer to prepare, Jason Walton, he's the founder of Moxie. He gave advice, and he gives this advice every year. He says, if you want to prepare for the summer, the thing to do is not to train more, it's to learn how to make and keep commitments. After you learn how to make and keep commitments, or in the process of it, you can train, but training more is not the answer. Being able to make and keep commitments is the answer. Because no matter how good you are at training, if you want to go sit on the curb before you knock the next door and you're constantly battling that because you can't keep your own commitments, and then finally you do go sit on the curb because you can't keep commitments to yourself, then it doesn't matter how good you are because you're never going to use the training to talk to people. Therefore, you're never going to sell. Therefore, you're never going to get results. And that does trickle over into every other aspect of life too. I took that seriously and I got really rigid in my discipline. It's actually something I'm not as good at now that I want to go back to. But I also did train several times a week with my team leader. But because that training wasn't like a simulatory experience for what would actually happen on the doors, it only helped me in the sense that I knew my words when I went into the summer. But I had to reprogram myself how I talked and everything because I wasn't training to talk the right way on the doors. If I wanted to be the best rookie in the company and not only outperform everyone, but lay a foundation for my future that would be more valuable than anything else, I would take commitments very seriously and I would get into a routine of making and keeping commitments to myself every single day. And I would start small and then build them up, and I would build it like a system, much like a bodybuilder would if they were training with a specific regimen or split at the gym, or much like you would if you were running a college football team with very tactical, focused, time-based activities that are meant to build up strengths and mitigate weaknesses in preparation for game day. And I would make sure that I was keeping commitments that were geared towards specific outcomes. Because it's one thing to make and keep any commitment, that's a good baseline, as long as it's not immoral. It's a completely different ballgame if you're making and keeping commitments that are in line with your outcomes. So if you set goals and then you keep commitments, so let's say this is the path to your goals, right? But then all the commitments that you keep actually lead to something over here or something over here. Like I would keep commitments to be on time for the gym. Is that important? Sure, it's important to be on time for things. That would maybe lead me to towards this because that would teach me how to be on time for the doors and take that seriously. But what if I was making and keeping commitments to, I don't know, what's something that's not immoral but that would still be a commitment that has nothing to do with sales?
Going to lunch with somebody.
Going where?
To lunch with somebody.
Yeah, if I made a commitment to go to lunch with somebody every day and I was like, that's my commitment, I'm going to do this every single day, that might be useful for something else in my life. And maybe I could twist it to be useful for me getting better at sales. But that's not in line with a sales goal necessarily. So we're now over here in this territory that's in line with getting good at networking. If I did want to make and keep commitments to go to lunch every day to build my relationships, you could do what's called stacking roles, where I say, okay, my number one priority in relationships wise is my relationship to God, my relationship to myself, my relationship to my spouse. So if that's my priority, could I make and keep commitments that would also benefit me in other things as well? And so maybe if I go make a commitment to go to lunch every day with someone, I could shift the outcome of that commitment back towards my sales goal and accomplish my relationship goals by saying, in this conversation, I'm going to practice empathic listening with this person. And I'm going to do that because I love this person, because I want to be a better friend with them. And as a byproduct, I also know it's going to help me get better at being empathic and the art of empathic listening on the doors with customers. So my point with that is I would tweak all of my commitments to be in line with that outcome, so long as they didn't deter me from my other relationship goals that are more important than sales. And that's just a general framework, I would say. Just spitballing here, I would come up with a routine that's like the gym, and I would say, where am I deficient? I would probably go take an assessment to say, how good am I at certain sales outcomes that I know I might need? And then I would meet with people who know and have experience with succeeding in that, but that are also good trainers, because just because someone's good at something doesn't mean they're a good trainer. So I'd want them to analyze me. I would get ruthless about my strengths and weaknesses, and then I would make and keep commitments that were in line with building up strengths and mitigating weaknesses, so long as they didn't deter me from my relationship goals. What I did differently in my most successful summer is exactly what I just described. Rookie summer, I serviced 191 accounts. Very bad compared to what everyone else was doing in the office and what I think everyone should be doing now. I needed to level up my skills in sales. And I basically tried to throw out everything that I knew about training, about sales, and start from the ground up and learn what would now be coined by Ryan Hall, I think is who I heard this from originally, is the game behind the game. So I understand the principles of human decision making. I read everything I could get my hands on that revolved around human decision making. Then I read everything I could find on persuasion and influence. I read every sales book that I could find. If it had sales in the title, I read it. I would read 3 or 4 books a week on this stuff, physically and audible at the gym. I was constantly training. I bought every single course I could find, not to apply everything. I just needed to know what's good and what's bad. just to back up a bit, when I started selling, I made a commitment to read a book a week. And the thing I learned reading a book a week is what books suck. That's all you learn, really, because it's not very good to actually have all of this information in your head that are different tactics. Tiger Woods, when he really made a slump after he hurt his back, was changing his swing coach. He had to, actually, because of the new limitations he had with a fused back. I think he fused his back. Is that, if you guys know that, correct it. But he had a back injury, and in order for him to come back, he had to change his swing coach. And Bob Rotella writes about this. He's a psychologist who focuses on sports psychology and performance psychology. And it was the change in swing coaches that caused a lot of these like nuanced issues with his performance. So you don't really want to have a bunch of swing coaches giving you advice because they all teach in a different way. So that was valuable for me only to learn what was good and what was bad. I did the same exact thing with sales training. I first needed to know what's good and what's bad, so I bought and learned everything I possibly could. Then I found really one person that I thought was the best trainer in the world. His name was Jordan Belfort, and this is like such an odd thing because I had never seen The Wolf of Wall Street. I didn't know anything about this guy except for all the immoral things that I'd heard he had done. But then when I bought his course, the straight line sales, I was like, man, there's really something to how this guy thinks about sales. He understands the game behind the game. So a lot of the principles that he espoused, I went and researched those principles specifically. And I would find peer-reviewed articles. I wanted to know the science of persuasion and influence. What are the actual mechanics that are universal for every human on planet Earth if you're not a sociopath or psychopath? What are the mechanics of making decisions? And then incorporate the way we naturally persuade and influence that has evolved over time. How do you incorporate that into human decision making? And from there, we built entirely new scripts. A lot of the modules that you watch and that training is all built off of that experience. Now, some of it rings like Jordan Belfort's training, but it's all the stuff that I had learned. So it's a conglomerate of all of it applied to door sales. In fact, when I was working with Jordan Belfort, he even came out and knocked doors with me. My point with all of this is to say, if anyone wants to master being good at door-to-door sales, you really have to master this framework of understanding persuasion and influence as it relates to human communication and human decision-making as it relates to persuasion and influence. That's the most effective way to understand it, and then you need a coach and trainer that's going to guide you on how that is applied to the doors. In the world of becoming the best at something, you basically have 3 layers. You have the truth of a thing, so it's like, what is the universal truth that applies in this situation? Then you have the principles, which is like, what are the principles at play that are built upon this item of truth? And then you have the application of those principles that is always changing. So I'll give you an example. It's a truth that, so energy in, benefits out. Truths are like equations. 2 + 2 always equals 4 in this world, at least. So because 2 + 2 always equals 4, what's the equation at play with someone making a decision to buy something new for themselves? This side of the equation has to equal better than what they currently have in order for this side of the equation to equal decision made, right? That's the truth. The principle at play here is the principle of control, or the principle of reciprocity. So the truth is, it takes this to make a decision. The principle might be reciprocity or value, and then the application might be, how does that apply in this very specific situation on the doors? And if someone can understand those layers, you can not only excel at anything you choose, but you can actually invent new ways to do them on the fly. Because once you understand, like, oh, when someone makes that body language, I know that they're engaged. And so relative to where I'm at right now in the conversation, I know what to do next because they just made this shift in their body language that told me they were engaged. It's so long-winded, but is there anything good there that we can build on? The most useful tool. What would you think would be the most useful tool? If you were to just not knowing anything, you're like, okay, if I had this one thing, then it would make all the difference. Most people would tell you the most useful tool would be a script. So a script would not be the most useful tool going into sales because a script boxes you in to a way of doing something without telling you why you're doing it. I would say the most useful tool for sales is, it's not really a tool, but it would be your ability to be self-aware. The mechanism in your own mind that allows you to be self-aware. It's self-awareness really almost to an extreme, but if you develop self-awareness at a high level, then you can unemotionally evaluate your own state and you can make tweaks. Also, we project ourselves onto everyone and everything else in the world. So the more I become self-aware, the more I can actually understand you as a person. I think there's something powerful to self-awareness that allows you to understand people better. So yeah, I would start with a good framework of self-analysis and being able to unemotionally evaluate yourself every day. And then take that same framework to analyzing and evaluating other people, and then using it for specific application on the doors. Or you could just go through all of our training and it'll help you develop that mindset. Yeah, exactly. If you go through it from video 1 to the end, it really builds this. It starts with frameworks and principles. It starts with the game behind the game. You can inner game, outer game. That's why it's called mastering yourself versus mastering the skills. And then it moves into these other specific applications. But you can see that methodology within the training where, take body language, for example. The body language module, there you'll see this idea of, okay, what makes up good body language? How has that evolved over time? Literally talk about evolution, because it's like you have to understand what openness versus closed offness means. And then, yeah, as I fix my own posture. And then you can take the tools into the application, and that's a powerful way of thinking about it. Am I answering your questions okay?
Yeah,
I'm losing my train of thought now too.
Really good indeed.
Great.
In terms of how do you prevent burnout throughout the summer?
So how do I prevent burnout? Prevent burnout by becoming obsessive about actually getting results and becoming unemotional about evaluating. Most people become emotional about themselves and their results, which leads to just this utter chaos and quitting everything that they do, essentially. Become extremely emotionally attached to outcomes and unemotional about processes, but then become married to processes and divorced from outcomes. It seems very paradoxical, right? If you're emotionally attached to an outcome, start with that first. So shift your emotional attachment from caring about how bad you are and if everyone sees it or not, to caring more about achieving something specific, right? So if my outcome is I want to service 400 accounts as a rookie, I need to become so emotionally attached to this outcome that everything else becomes irrelevant, as long as I have boundaries within the realm of morals. The reason why that's important is because if you become too emotionally attached to the things that happen on the way, then it doesn't give you adaptability in order to achieve the outcome. Because if you've never done it before, you don't know how to do it, even if someone tells you. And you have to trust that what they're telling you is good, and you have to go all into those things. But if you can't evaluate yourself unemotionally in the process, then you won't even want to look at the results. Does that make sense, first of all, before I go to the next part? Because the next part is now a paradox to this, which is divorce yourself from the results and marry yourself to the processes. So once you've determined what outcomes you want and you're now attached to them emotionally, and that involves a whole process of understanding your why, really uncovering that, understanding the deeper layers of what it will mean to achieve the results. Once you've done that and you've determined that you're more emotionally attached to that than you are to the processes, now what you do is you marry yourself to the processes to where you strictly adhere to them until they are not working. And you don't know that on one day. You know that after you evaluate day after day, week after week over a period of time. So, for example, in the summer, you're gonna have lower sales days usually at the beginning of the summer. The risk of selling really well as soon as you start selling, if you're a rookie, is that you think you're good. And the problem is, you're probably only selling well because you're excited. Now, if someone comes out and they sell 5 on their first day, or 7, 8, 10 on their first day, something crazy, you convince yourself that you're already good enough. And so when you get tired and you lose the excitement, or when you start training on the things that will help you sell 12 a day, you're gonna dip at first because you're not applying those principles within your own personality. That's problematic. Is, let's take this, for example, on the day-to-day. If I'm emotionally driven by my end result of servicing 400 accounts as a rookie, but I'm so prideful about wanting to service 5 accounts in a day like I did my first week, then I'm going to abandon the processes that my team leaders are telling me which will help me get to that 12 accounts a day. But that's because I'm too emotionally attached to the short-term results, meaning I'm married to those short-term results and I'm divorced from the processes that get me to the big goal at the end. Is this confusing? No. Is this making sense? Okay. So that's why that's paradoxical, because it's almost order of operations as well. It's like in order of operations, you have to become emotionally attached to the long-term outcome and then not at all attached to the processes. But then in the short term, you have to marry yourself to the processes and unemotionally evaluate the short-term outcomes. Develop the ability to become emotionally attached to long-term outcomes, and then pivot in your short-term processes when they are not working in order to achieve the long-term outcomes. And then you also have this ability to divorce yourself from the short-term outcomes and become married to these processes until you see they're not working, unemotionally evaluating your short-term stuff and your statistics and your own awareness and resilience and all of those things. You can take that template into everything else you do in life. So where I see this show up is how people handle their marriages. If you're gonna have a good marriage, a really good wedding is easy to pull off. A really good marriage is among the hardest things you could possibly do. And everyone thinks that they have the capability, but it is challenging. Now, how do you mitigate the potential for a failure in a marriage? And we all have these failures that we can learn from and look back on and change, but how do you mitigate that potential? If you're emotionally attached to having a really good marriage over time and you can see yourself at the end, and I picture my 50th wedding anniversary all the time. It's like, how do I want to feel about my wife and with her in my 50th wedding anniversary? That drives all short-term decisions. How long do you think my wife's gonna wanna talk to just this grumpy dude who has a problem every single day? Sarah would put up with that for a while, but not longer than she should. So if I allow myself to become emotionally attached to short-term things and not to the long-term vision, then it's detrimental. But on the flip side, if I can become married to the processes of what I think it will take to have that 50th wedding anniversary and how I envision it and the feeling that we have and how people feel about us there and what our children are like because of the love that we had in our marriage. If I'm emotionally attached to that, then coming home and being tired for the half hour I have to talk to her on this really long day that I'm about to have, or that I just did have or whatever, that 30 minutes becomes very important, because you have enough 30-minute sessions where it's my wife doesn't want to talk to me because I'm just grumpy and take everything out on everyone else. That's not a recipe for having what I want at the end. So I think it's a good application for that. But that's why I care so much about this sales stuff, because it really can be the blueprint for enhancing every other aspect of your life.
Yeah, I love that. That was really good.
50 minutes, Kyle.
Okay, yeah. How many more questions do you have?
Just one.
Okay, great. We'll finish up on this one.
So this is-
How do I pick or train my team to make sure they're as successful? Did Ashley give you this question?
No, it's good.
Nice. Okay, sweet. This sounds like a question that Ashley would ask, which means you guys are very alike, where she's training you really
I've
well.
asked her about it too, because she does all the social media. So if I get there, I want to know how to do
When,
it.
when you get there.
When I get there.
That's a well-worded way to ask that question. Pick and train teams. First off, the principle of beginning with the end in mind is increasingly important when it comes to working with other people. Start with what is my end goal and feeling for this team that I want to have. Picture like the emotional aspect of the team first, because it helps then picture the logistical aspects that would lead to that emotional outcome. And humans, we're emotional creatures. Like everything to us revolves around emotion. Imagine what the end outcome of this team is. Now, here's another principle that's effective when it comes to building a team and to training a team. The longer term your vision for this team, the more effective you can be in the short term. So picture, what's it like to have a team that would want to get together and have like a yearly reunion because of all the cool things we're doing in life separately, right? Maybe we're not even working together or doing business together. Most people think when I say long-term vision for your team, they're like, yeah, but I don't even know if I want to do this for another couple of years. No, what I'm saying is, could you build something so cool that you would want to meet up every year just to have, I don't know, either like accountability towards each other because you learned how valuable that was, or just because your bond was so strong that you loved being around each other and you loved raising your families in a similar way and you found the principles of success, they worked over the long term. Draw that up and do a version of rough drafting on this to start with the question of what do you want long term for this team and what's the feeling around that team, and then what's everybody doing, how do they feel about each other, what did you cultivate in terms of how are people's families better because of your team. So go as big and as long term as possible. Then I would dial down to the short term and I would say, okay, based on this long-term vision for my team, what is the short-term win that will be the first step in achieving that? So the short-term win is always going to be something you can bookend. So like a summer, you can bookend a summer and you can say this summer is over now, right? So that's the first bookended experience is the summer. And I say, all right, so what's our outcome for this team at the end of the summer? Now the short-term vision needs to be focused on something that you achieve that you're proud of. Then from there, I would say, okay, what does a well-operating unit look like that enables everyone in their own diverse and unique strengths and weaknesses to achieve that bookended outcome? And just logistically speaking, I would draw up what are my ideal members of this team and what are the positions that I might want to give them on this team so that they're serving and contributing, because everyone wants to contribute to something in their life and they want to be contributed to. As much as we want to believe that we're all selfish, we actually do want to contribute. That's a higher ideal than self-actualization, which was Maslow's highest hierarchy of needs. On his deathbed, he came up with one that was higher, which was like perpetuating oneself. That's more important than self-actualization, than your own needs. So I would come up with roles that would be ideal for this team that I could recruit toward in order to have specific people. Start recruiting towards those positions. And in that summer, I thought we probably need another hype man, and I'd like to have a couple people who are really good with data and who think like a statistician or someone who's very good at analyzing data and drawing outcomes. Because I thought that would be important to inspire a culture of like ruthless evaluation and looking at what we're doing and if it's good or bad. So we recruited towards that. That's a framework of building a team that I think is very ideal. How I would go about training this team is it's a very similar process to building the team. It's what is the longest term outcome that you want? What are we actually trying to achieve that we're proud of? And then how do we leverage everyone's strengths and weaknesses so that they all perform at a high level, but so that I can meet them where they're at and coach them to become the best version of themselves and the best sales trainers. So it would involve a mix of personal coaching and then group training. In the group training, I would always talk about principles and standards, and so I would never lower my standards in a group setting. If you listen to me talk in a group setting, I'm much more hardcore than if you talk to me one-on-one. The reason why is because in a group setting, you cannot lower your standards for what excellence means. You will get what you tolerate if you lower those standards in group excellence. Sorry, the truth is that you always get what you tolerate. But what you tolerate will be mediocre if you allow that to be driven by people's feelings on the group level. So if someone's late, if you tolerate people being late, everyone will be late. So what's the message that you're giving about your training if you are just okay with people being late? It's like, my message is my training's so bad that I don't even care if you're here for it, actually. I'm just doing it to do it. Always have a high standard in your group settings. Never compromise that standard in group settings. But with individuals, meet them at their level and inspire them and train them. I mean that in a specific way. So inspire them so that they feel motivated and give them capacity in the way that you train, and then follow through until they actually adopt that capacity to achieve higher results. If you can do that, then you've effectively created something very powerful for the future. It's very effective. And think about a family, right? Like when you have a family meeting, like my mom and dad would always, every family dinner was this way, which was every day. They were never lenient with standards when talking to the entire family. But one-on-one, it was exactly where I was at and what I needed to get to the next thing. So that's how you have to take leading people, because if you can do that, you can lead the masses and you can be there for the one. And there's nothing more important than leading the one at their level. I think it's like you can preach principles to the masses, but you meet the one where they are and help them inspire them and train them to become something better. Is that good?
That's perfect.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah. Can I say cut?
Yeah, say it.
Cut.
Jess, thank you so much for coming all the way here. Wow, like